Hello and welcome everyone to the Varsity Tutors STEM Success Series, where we pretty frequently give you opportunities to exercise your brain. But today we're going to do something extra special, and we're going to talk about the brain specifically itself. We've got our friends from Pacific Science Center in Seattle here. Holly Duskin is your instructor here, and as you can see, she loves the brain so much. She has one right behind her, and soon we'll have one right next to her. We're going to learn all about how our brains work. Now, a couple things before I turn it over to Holly. One, since we're studying our brains today, you don't get to turn yours off. For one, please have a marker and a piece of paper nearby because we're going to do a little bit of a brain challenge in just a little bit where you'll want to have that handy. Two, please keep it interactive. Holly's going to ask you some questions to find out what you know about the brain, what you think about the brain. We want to put your brain to work. So use the chat panel to the right of the screen to be able to answer some of her questions. And throughout the class, your brain may come up with all kinds of interesting questions. Type those in the chat, and throughout the class, I'll be collecting those. And in the last 10 or so minutes of class, we're going to give Holly a little bit of a brain test with your questions to find some answers to all those things on your mind, or maybe I should say your brain. So also have a camera nearby because as we do our drawing challenge, we want to make sure everybody has a chance to share it with the world. So if you've got a camera nearby, I think a lot of you have been to these classes. We'll do a selfie challenge in just a little bit before that Q&A portion. And if you upload your selfie to Instagram and tag Pacific Science Center and Varsity Tutors, you'll be entered to win a prize package that includes some incredible things, including a field trip for your class through Pacific Science Center and 3 free months of VT Plus with Varsity Tutors. So all kinds of exciting things. We'll tell you a little bit more about it later in the program. But with that, my brain is exhausted from all this talking. So I want to turn it over so we can get some insights from the brain of Holly Duskin and the team from Pacific Science Center. Holly, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for having us. Again, my name is Holly, and I am joining from Pacific Science Center today. So thanks all for being here. We are going to be talking about our marvelous minds, our brains. And to get us started, I do have with me a real human brain model. So a model here is, again, an example or a representation of something that helps us to better visualize it. So together, we're just going to take a quick look at this brain model, and I would love for all of you to kick us off in the chat and share some of the things that you observe or notice about our brain model here. So go ahead and share with me anything you're seeing or noticing about this model. I wonder what we might be able to learn. All right, wow, I'm seeing a lot of things already coming in from folks, noticing a lot of different lines here on our brain. So I see some words people are using are like squiggly or wiggly lines or wrinkles all over our brain. That is correct. So here on our outer layer here, there does seem to be a bunch of deep wrinkles. And all of these wrinkles here on our brain, if we were actually to lay them out completely flat, they would take up a lot more space. It would actually fill up about the space of an open newspaper. But of course, this isn't going to fit inside of our heads. So over time, our brain has evolved to actually be able to take all of that extra surface area and squish it up to fit into a smaller space. But when it does that, it results in all these deep wrinkle patterns that we can see. All right, I see some more great observations coming in from folks. Looks like some people are asking, what is this line that's right here in the middle? So not only do we have these squiggly wrinkle lines, we also have this one straight line right down the middle of our heads here. And this line actually divides our brain into the two halves that we call hemispheres. And you might have heard the word hemisphere before. We talk about this on a globe, the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. It just means half of a rounded object. So on our brain, we've got our left hemisphere and our right hemisphere. But sort of the interesting thing about these hemispheres is that the left side of our brain actually controls movement on the right side of our body, and the right side of our brain controls the movement on the left side of our body. All right, let's go ahead and see what else we might be able to observe or notice here on our brain model. Let's see if we take a look at the inside, what we might be able to find here. What do you notice on the inside of our model? Yeah, I'm seeing some folks saying they're seeing different parts, different areas, things that are differently shaped. That's exactly right. So our brain is made up of several different parts. And this outer area here is called the cerebral cortex. Cortex actually comes from an old word for bark. So just like how the bark of a tree is the outer layer, our cerebral cortex is the outer layer of our brain. Then on the inside of our brain here, we've got our limbic system, which has some different parts, our brain stem that connects out to our spinal cord and the rest of our body, and our cerebellum here in the back, which looks a little different. It actually comes from an old word that means little brain. So I can kind of see that little shape here, like a smaller little brain. So today in our program, we are going to be taking a look at some of these different parts of our brain and investigating the different jobs or functions that these different parts do for us. So we're going to start out on that cerebral cortex, the outer area of our brain, which actually has some different lobes or regions that make up that outer area. And to get us started, we're going to begin with our frontal lobe, which is pretty easy for me to remember. It's right here in the front of our brains. And your frontal lobe is responsible for higher level cognitive thinking. So things like planning or problem solving, decision making, communicating, those sorts of tasks, really important things that we're doing every day. So to put our frontal lobes to the test, you are going to need that piece of paper and a dark marker, just like Brian mentioned earlier. So hopefully you've got that paper and marker nearby. We are going to play some frontal lobe Pictionary. So the way this activity is going to work, I have a picture here in front of me, and it's going to be my job to try to communicate with you and describe the picture that I'm looking at, but without really telling you exactly what it is. Your job is to listen to my directions as best as you can and try to draw what I am describing to you. It's absolutely okay if your drawing ends up looking totally different than mine. That's no problem. The goal is just to listen to my instructions and do the very best that you can. All right, here we go. I want you to start out by drawing a medium-sized circle, maybe about the size of a closed fist. All right, got that? Medium-sized circle. Okay, so far so good. On the bottom of your circle, I want you to draw two straight lines that are sticking out of the bottom of your circle. So they're touching the bottom of your circle, but they're not going into the inside. Medium-sized lines. So again, maybe about as tall as your closed fist. All right, how's everybody doing? We've got a circle with two straight lines coming out the bottom so far. Now what I want you to do is at the very bottom of one of those lines, I want you to draw three tiny short lines that are sticking off in all directions. Okay, and now I want you to do the same thing to that other line that you had coming out of the circle. So again, at the bottom of that line, three tiny short lines sticking off in all directions. Okay, and we're about halfway through our drawing. So I'm actually kind of curious, does anybody have any guesses so far of what you think I might be trying to get you to draw? If you have a guess, you can go ahead and share that in the chat with me and we'll see. Oh gosh, okay, people are thinking maybe a jellyfish, an alien, a chicken, maybe a plate and some forks. Okay, these are really great guesses. I'm going to give you the rest of your directions and let's see if it comes together here. Okay, so back up on your circle. I want you to draw on one side of your circle, on the outside of the circle, but touching it, a medium-sized triangle. All right, so now you've got a medium-sized triangle touching one side of your circle. And on the opposite side of your circle, I want you to draw two tiny triangles that are touching each other, again, on the outside of your circle. And these two triangles, I want you to fill them in with your marker so they're dark. All right, how's everybody doing so far? We only have 2 steps left, and these last 2 steps are going to be inside your circle. So inside your circle, I want you to draw a small filled in dot, and I want it to be towards the side of the circle that has the 2 tiny triangles. All right, and your last direction. Again, you're just doing the very best you can, even if you're confused. Your last direction is inside the circle. I want you to draw, let's see, it looks like a squiggle line or like a backwards 3. So go ahead and draw a backwards 3. It's a line with 2 bumps in it. It's inside the circle, and it's a bit closer to the side that only has 1 triangle. All right, artists, nice work. I'm curious if you all have some guesses of what you think this might be. I see a lot of people sharing things in the chat. These are all really great. And would you like to see the drawing that I was looking at? Yeah, okay. I will reveal what picture I was looking at, and you can see how close your drawing is. Okay, nicely done. A lot of you were thinking it might be a bird. So whether your drawing looks just like this one or whether it looks completely different, that is absolutely fine. But what I would love for you to do now is go ahead and share with me in the chat, what were some things that made this activity so challenging? So while you are sharing with me the parts that were challenging for you, I'll tell you a little bit some things that were challenging for me. My frontal lobe was really hard at work as well. So when I was looking at this picture, I had to do some decision making about what parts I was going to try to describe first. What words should I use to try to communicate with you? I had to plan out the order to give the directions. And I see for a lot of you, there was kind of some similar challenges. So people are saying things like listening and understanding, deciding where to draw each shape, imagining the shape in your head and then having to draw it out, or knowing how big or small to draw things. Absolutely. So all of those different tasks are things that our frontal lobe helps us with. So again, things like communicating, planning, problem solving. So they were really hard at work during that activity. And even the drawing itself was happening from our frontal lobe, where our motor cortex is, that tells our different body parts how to move. But folks, I'm pretty bummed because I really wish I could see all of your amazing bird drawings. So we are actually going to pause right here and do our selfie challenge. So keep that bird drawing and let's turn it over to Brian for any tips for us in our selfie challenge here.
All right, so everyone, we'll get one more pass at it. If your camera's not ready, you're still finishing up putting your name on your drawing, that's okay. Step 1 is take a picture. We're going to put it back full screen with the original here in just a second, so you can get a photo with the exact one. Lean into the screen, take a picture with your drawing as well. Don't be shy if it doesn't look like anything. Here's mine, so that's just how it is. So take that picture. If you upload it to Instagram and tag at PacSci and at Varsity Tutors, you'll be entered to win that prize package that includes 3 free months of VT Plus and that field trip for your entire class through Pacific Science Center. So with that, I'm going to turn it back so we can get right to the drawing itself that we want to take that picture with. Lean into the screen. Let's get those pictures, and then we'll move on to talk about the rest of the brain.
Thanks, Brian. So here's our original bird drawing. Go ahead and hold up your picture. Get that selfie shot. I am so excited to see all of your amazing drawings, whether they look like birds or aliens or jellyfish. It's all good. And don't worry if you're still making time to take those photos. We are going to have one more chance at the end of our program to do that. Okay, so to introduce the next part of the brain that we're going to be talking about, I have another at-home challenge for you. So what I would love for you to do is take your hands, clap them together, and then we're going to rub them back and forth really quickly and then see what you notice happening, and go ahead and share with me in the chat. All right, here we go. Oh my gosh. Okay. If your arms are as tired as mine, you can shake them out. And I already see people sharing in the chat what was happening to their hands. A lot of people are saying things like they got hot or warm. Some people's hands felt sweaty. They felt some friction. Absolutely. I noticed that happening to my hands too. But how did we know that our hands were getting warmer? Well, that all has to do with a part of our brain called the parietal lobe. So our parietal lobe is responsible for helping us receive and process that sensory information coming in from all over our body. So it helps us to know when something is hot or cold, or if something is soft or hard feeling. And it also helps us know when we're feeling pain. So if you touch something really sharp, that message would get sent up to your parietal lobe that tells you, ouch, that hurts, and tells you to pull that hand away. Now, interestingly, even though all the rest of the parts of our body can feel pain, our brains themselves actually don't have any pain receptors. So our brain tissue is incapable of feeling pain. And this is why sometimes during brain surgery, the surgeon could possibly even have their patients be awake while they're cutting into that brain tissue. And it helps them be able to monitor the patient's process during the procedure, but they don't have to worry about causing any pain there in the brain tissue. Another thing that our parietal lobe helps us with is being aware of where all of our body parts are in space, and we call that proprioception. So you can test out your proprioception with me right now. What I want you to do is stick out your tongue and see if you can touch your tongue to your upper lip. Go ahead and give it a try. Okay, got it? 100% success rate. Nice job. So even though we can't see our tongue or our lip, right? We can't see them. We don't really know where they are, but our parietal lobe helps us keep track of where our body parts are, and it allows us to be able to perfectly match them up. Nice work, everybody. So the whole time that you've actually been listening to this presentation, you've also been using another part of your brain called the temporal lobe. And our temporal lobe plays a really key role in auditory processing. So right now, these sound vibrations and sound waves are traveling through the speakers on your device. They're going into your ears, and it's our temporal lobe's job to help us understand all those different pitches and frequencies, the volume of the sound, and turning it into meaningful information for us. So we are going to do another experiment here to test out our temporal lobes. So you will need, again, a piece of paper and a writing utensil. So you can maybe flip over your bird drawing or flip over to the next page in your science notebook. And for this experiment, I am going to read out loud to you a list of 10 grocery store items. And your job is just to listen first. So no writing, maybe even fold your hands to stop the temptation. You're just listening and trying to remember what those 10 words are. Our temporal lobe not only helps us make sense of language, it also helps us with our memory. So after I'm done reading those 10 words, I will say go, and I'll put on a 40-second timer for you to write down as many words as you can remember. All right? Okay, so turn on your listening ears, get your temporal lobes ready, and I'm going to read out loud our 10 grocery items. Here we go. Apples, carrots, cheese, grapes, peppers, milk, bread, oranges, yogurt, and coffee. Okay, those were 10 grocery items. Go ahead. You've got 40 seconds to write down as many as you can remember. Nice job, everybody. You've got about 20 seconds left. How many of those 10 grocery items do you think you can remember? Once you've gotten as many as you can manage, you can share with me in the chat the number of items you remembered. All right, nicely done. I see. Yeah, we got a good range here. So some people are at 3 or 4. That's usually about how well I do when I do this activity. We got some 7s, 8s, a few folks saying 10. Wow, that is really impressive. All right, now everybody go ahead, and I know we all probably forgot a few, so just go ahead and share with me in the chat all the words that you forgot. No? Nothing? Oh. Of course, we can't say the words that we forgot. I'm sure you're probably dying to know which ones might have slipped from your mind. So I'll go ahead and share with you all. Here was the list of the 10 words. So you can check your work, maybe see which ones you remembered or forgot. And while you're doing that, it would be great to hear from all of you. What ideas do you have of ways that we could have made this task a little bit easier for you? So what could we have done to make us better able to remember all 10 words? Is there anything we could have done differently to help us out there? What do you think? Okay, yeah, it looks like a lot of you have some good memory tricks. So someone was thinking we could have put them in a song. Absolutely. I would love to hear a song made up of all these words. We could have repeated the words again. So repetition absolutely helps with memory. Someone said seeing pictures of the different grocery items. So maybe for some of us, listening to those items wasn't really the best way to go. Maybe it would have been better if they could have seen the list or seen pictures of those items. Or someone wrote, yeah, being able to write them down. So we are going to do our second memory test, but this time we're going to change it up a bit. So instead of listening and using so much of our temporal lobe to help us with our auditory processing, this time I'm going to show you a poster with 10 completely random objects on it. And again, your job is going to be to take a look at that poster. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to look at the poster. This time you're just using your eyes instead of your ears. Try to memorize as many as you can. And at the end, I'll give you that 40-second timer again to write down as many as you can remember. All right, so here's your memory poster. You've got 30 seconds to memorize all of these objects. Good work, everybody. About 12 seconds left. Try to memorize all of these objects. All right, and go. Get that piece of paper back out, write down or draw whatever you can remember. All right, you got about 15 seconds left. There was 10 objects on the poster, so think about how close you're getting, how many objects you got. You can share with me in the chat how many you were able to remember this time. All right, and there's our 40 seconds. So I see some similar numbers to last time, maybe a little bit higher, a few more, maybe 6s, 7s, and 8s. Nice work. But I want you all to think about this, right? For some of us, it might have been easier in memory test 1, where we were more using our temporal lobe. We were listening to those grocery items and trying to remember them that way. Whereas for others of us, it might have been easier if we were able to see the pictures instead. So even though we all have the same parts in our brains, all of our brains work a little bit differently, and everybody's brain has different things that work best for them. And so that's one of the great things, is that we all have a brain. We can constantly be learning new things about the way that our brain works, and paying attention to what works best for you is going to help you make sure that you're using your brain the way that works for you throughout your life. All right, so in that second test, when we were looking at that memory poster, we were actually incorporating in another part of our brain. So if you haven't noticed already, all the parts of our brain, they work together. So even though they have these specialized functions, they definitely need to collaborate, even for us to do the most simple of things. But the part that we were using when we were looking at that poster is called our occipital lobe. So you can see here, it's located actually in the very back of our head, the back portion of our brain. And this is the lobe that is responsible for helping us to process visual information. So when we were looking at that poster, that visual information was being taken in by our eyes, and it was actually sent through our optic nerve back to our occipital lobe, which then helps us to make sense of the things that we are seeing. And one of the most fun ways to learn a little bit more about our visual system and our occipital lobe is actually to try to trick them. So we're going to explore a couple optical illusions here to learn a little bit more about how they work. So go ahead and take a look at these two ballerina dancers here. And you can just see the silhouette of them, the outline of them. And I want you to pay attention to what direction they are turning. Are they spinning to the left? Are they spinning to the right? So surprisingly, it's actually possible to see these ballerinas spinning both to the left and to the right. And you can actually probably get them to switch directions. So you could try looking at the ballerina figures and then try blinking. You can try looking away and looking back, see if you can get the direction to switch. Or the one that works most for me is if I look right at the ballerina's head, or where their face would be, and try to get to see if you can get them to switch direction to spin the other way. So hopefully some of you are getting that to work, but the way this illusion works is because of something called bistable perception. And that means that the ballerina is a really ambiguous or vague shape, and it can be seen from two different perspectives. We can either see it going clockwise or counterclockwise. And because this is just a two-dimensional image, right? It's flat on our screen. Our visual system is trying to construct that three-dimensional space around the figure to help us better interpret what it is that we are seeing. But without being able to clearly see the ballerina's face or any of the surroundings to give us clues, our brain's just using the most information it has to make its best guess. All right, neuroscientists, let's go try out another optical illusion here. So for this one, go ahead and focus in on the blue fish. And it's okay for you to blink, but I want you to really, really focus and concentrate right on that blue fish, staring at the middle. So as you are staring at this blue fish, the light from your screen and the colors, they're bouncing into your eyes, into the retina of your eye, into some special cells called cones. And these cells are color receptors. So they help us to see different types of color. You better still be staring right at that blue fish. Keep focusing on it. Nice job. And as we are focusing on this fish here, our cones, those receptors, they're getting really, really tired out. So when I count down to 0, we're all going to switch over to look at the bowl, okay? In 3, 2, 1, 0. Look at the bowl. All right, and blink a couple times. I see some folks sharing in the chat. Yeah, so they are seeing an orange fish in blue water. If it didn't work for you, you can just go ahead, head on over to the blue fish, try it again. But what was happening was that because those cones in our eyes, they were really exhausted or tired out, when we looked at the bowl, we actually get something called an after image that shows us the opposite colors, hence the orange fish and the blue water. And after about 5 to 10 seconds, our cones have had time to rest, and then we can see the empty bowl again. All right, scientists, I have one last optical illusion for us here. So for this one, yes, you are just seeing a screen of some blurry, fuzzy colors. But what I want you to do is go ahead and stare right at the very center of this picture. And for this one, it works best if you try not to blink. So we don't want anyone hurting their eyes, so definitely just take a break and look to the side or blink if you need to. But then go back, look at the middle, try not to blink, and go ahead and just relax your eyes, relax the muscles in your face, and see what you notice. Or should I say, what you don't notice? So if this illusion is working for you, you might notice that all of those colors are actually starting to disappear. And soon you are looking at what appears to be just a blank white screen. So this illusion is called the Troxler effect. And what's happening is that our brains actually are geared towards, because it's a survival instinct, always paying attention to and recognizing stimuli in our environment that are changing. So again, our brain has a reason it wants to pay attention to things that are constantly moving or changing around us. But when we just stare at these fuzzy colors and we don't blink, we're not moving our eyes, our brain thinks to itself, this is just static, it's not moving, therefore it's not important, I don't need to pay attention to it anymore. And we actually stop seeing it. It disappears from our perception. All right, nice job, folks. I would love to hear from all of you in the chat of which illusion was your favorite, the ballerina, the fishbowl, or the third one, the Troxler effect. So go ahead and share with me there if you had a favorite of those 3 optical illusions. I hope you had fun tricking your visual system and your occipital lobe a little bit here. All right, and for the last part of our program today, I actually have something really, really special to share with all of you. So I kind of tried to trick you all at the beginning, but I do actually have with me a real human brain for us to get to take a look at today. So the first thing I want to let you know is that this is what we call challenge by choice. So that means it's your choice if you would like to see a real human brain today or not. If you don't want to see it, that's no problem. You can just look away from your screen. But I definitely encourage all of you who might be a little bit curious to stick around with us. And the second thing I want to tell you is that this brain was donated to us by a real person who decided that they wanted, when they died, their brain to go to science and education purposes, so that people like you and me could learn more about how the brain works and about our bodies. So it's really, really important that we are very respectful of this human brain that we have to look at here, and that anything we share in the chat or things that we're sharing with other people, just that, again, we're being respectful and we're using our scientific language, our science observations for things. So I encourage you, if your instinct is to think maybe like ew or gross, again, try and think of maybe a science word for that. So what about it is making you have that reaction? And what do you observe or notice about the brain? All right. So we can take a quick look here. Here's our human brain. And a lot of times people want to know about the person who donated it, but it is an anonymous donation. So we actually don't really know anything about the person except that they were an adult. So we do know this is an adult human brain, and it is about the average size of an adult brain, which is about 3 pounds. So let's go ahead and take a closer look here. And like I said, on average, brains weigh about actually 2.7 to 2.9 pounds. And sometimes people want to know if, the larger the size brain, is that correlated to higher intelligence? Does that make you smarter? But that is actually false. So, amongst human to human, if someone has a slightly larger brain or slightly smaller brain, that doesn't affect their intelligence. And in fact, Albert Einstein, who, many of us might consider to be a very intelligent person, his brain was actually a little smaller than average, only about 2.7 pounds. All right, so as we are observing and taking a closer look at our brain specimen here, go ahead and start sharing with us in the chat if you have any observations. Maybe you might recognize some of the parts that we talked about earlier. And also if you have any questions about the brain or about any of the things that we've talked about so far in class. So I'm going to keep reviewing our brain specimen here, answering a couple questions, and then we'll save some of those bigger questions for later on at the end. Okay, so I'm seeing, let's see, a lot of folks were noticing right off the bat those wrinkles that we talked about earlier. Exactly, and these big wrinkles are called gyri. And they are actually pretty similarly patterned from person to person. There's similar patterns to these wrinkles. People also might have been noticing this line down the middle that's separating our left hemisphere from our right hemisphere. Good observations. Let's see, someone wants to know which way is the front. So this side over here is towards the front where our eyes would be. This side is towards the back. So the occipital lobe would be back here. The frontal lobe would be over here. Someone is noticing, yeah, that it looks wet and asking if it's wet. It is. So one of the ways that we help to preserve this brain to keep it over time is we do keep it in a gentle liquid chemical called Carosafe. So that does just help to preserve it. And we do want to keep it wet. If we let it get too dried out, that wouldn't be great for the preservation of it. All right, let's go ahead and flip over, take a look at the underside here, see if we can recognize any more parts that we talked about earlier. So when we were talking about all those wrinkly bits, remember that's the cerebral cortex out here on the outside. You might notice here that cerebellum that we mentioned at the very beginning. So I always think this part actually looks sort of like feathers to me. So I don't know, maybe you see that too. But the cerebellum, again, the little brain here in the back, it helps us with coordination and balance and posture. So if you were to try standing on one foot, that would be using your cerebellum to help you with that. And it also helps us with muscle coordination. So again, a lot of the parts of our brain work together, even though our motor cortex in the frontal lobe is the one that gives directions to our body parts to move. Our cerebellum then helps us with that muscle coordination. Okay, a lot of folks are curious in the chat, what are those tubes in the middle? Or someone described them as noodles. Interesting comparison here, but I can see it. I can see where you're going with that. So these tubes here in the middle, this is part of the optic nerve. So remember how we talked about information from our eyeballs, that visual stimuli coming in? It gets sent through these nerves, through these little tubes called the optic nerve. And this here in the middle is an X shape. It's called the optic chasm. And it actually sends information from our right visual field over to the left side of our occipital lobe, and information from our left visual field over to the right side of our occipital lobe. All right, a couple of folks are asking, what does it feel like? That is a good one. So I describe it, it feels sort of like modeling clay. So if you've ever used that really thick, strong modeling clay, it's definitely a little tougher than Play-Doh, for example, but it is still a little bit soft. So we do want to be really gentle when we're handling it. All right, let's take a look. I have one last kind of cool part here to show us. So we're going to take a look at the inside of one of these hemispheres. And again, don't forget, you can be sharing questions and observations with us in the chat. All right, so now we can see here a few of those other parts that we were talking about earlier. So again, it's really clear now, the outer part, the cerebral cortex, and then this inner part that is the limbic system in here. And our limbic system has a few other things. It's where a lot of our emotion comes from. So things like fear or love or happiness often originate here in the limbic system. Our hippocampus is also in here, which helps us more with memory. And our thalamus is in our limbic system, which helps to control a lot of our hormones. Let's see, some folks are noticing this long part here. So this is the brain stem, and you might kind of recognize it from when we saw it from this side, the brain stem coming out here. And again, the brainstem is that part that is then going to connect out here to your spinal cord, which again goes down your backbone or your spine, protected by those vertebrae, those bones that protect it. And this is where all that information from the rest of your body gets sent up through your brainstem, which then directs that information out to the different parts of the brain that it needs to go to. And our brainstem is also important for some automatic processes. Like, for example, is everybody here remembering to tell your heart to beat? Everybody? Oh, good. Okay, we got some beating hearts. How about, is everybody remembering to breathe? Breathe in, breathe out. Okay, good. Well, all of those things are being controlled by our brainstem. It also tells us to digest our food and other automatic processes. So I don't know about you, but I'm always very grateful to my brainstem because I don't want to have to remember to keep telling my heart to beat or keep telling myself to breathe in and out. So our brainstem does that for us. This is also kind of the most basic part of our brain. So even animals with very, very simple brains, they will usually just have this part, the brain stem. All righty. Awesome. I see one more thing coming in about the wrinkles. Some folks were wondering a little bit more about those and asking if all animals have wrinkly brains. So, actually, not all animals have these deep wrinkles here. So, actually, mice, rats, and koala bears all actually have smooth brains. So it depends on the animal. Not all of them have evolved to have that wrinkly nature for them to be able to fit inside of their skulls. Alrighty, so I think I'm going to pause there to kind of wrap things up and save some times for questions. But I do want to share that, thinking about all these different parts of our brain and all the really, really important jobs that our brain does for us in our day-to-day life, it just always reminds me of the ways that we want to make sure that we're taking care of our brain, right? So things like staying hydrated by drinking water, eating healthy food, getting lots of sleep and exercise, and also things like wearing a helmet whenever we're doing maybe a dangerous sport and making sure that helmet's all the way down over our forehead to help protect our frontal lobe. Those are some things that you can do to help make sure that you are keeping your super important brain really healthy and active and working for you. All right, Brian, let's see if we've got any questions.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much. My limbic system is going crazy. I loved this class and all kinds of other emotions. I bet everyone else too. So a couple people had asked about the selfie contest, and I know we had kind of done it with our temporal lobes because I told you about it. We're going to get the occipital involved on the way out with some visual instructions as well. Hopefully, I got all that right. I was taking notes along with my drawing, but with that, I want to make sure everybody knows the rules here. We'll get one more crack at the selfie contest. I'll even join in and hold up my not particularly amazing drawing here in just a second. If you upload these to Instagram, tag Pacific Science Center, which is just PacSci, and we'll have that up on the way out, and Varsity Tutors, which is at Varsity Tutors, you'll be entered to win a field trip for your whole class, courtesy of Pacific Science Center, and 3 free months of VT Plus, which is just a real treat for your brain. You can learn anything, basically any day. If you want to learn more about VT Plus, there's a link on your screen to learn more about it, and you can buy it if you don't win it. With that, I'm going to join in the selfie here. Here is my drawing here, and how we'll get the official one there. So give everybody one more chance to get those out there. Hopefully yours is a little better than mine. And I'll mention I cheated. I talked to Holly beforehand. I kind of knew what was coming up, and I still screwed it up. So give you one here. And then we'll give you one with just the drawing as a comparison.
Sure. Yeah. So here's our bird drawing again, the one that I was looking at. But again, remember, it's absolutely great. I'm excited to see all of your very unique original birds.
All right. And with that, let's do some questions. Your guys' brains were in overdrive asking some amazing questions. Although I will mention how you can tell you've done this before. You were knocking questions off as people were asking them. It was like, boom, here's the answer. Boom, here's the answer. One of my favorites came in, was just sort of a genre of, can you tell us, how does our brain help us remember things? But at the same time, including things like a lot of, kids like, how do I what part of my brain is responsible for helping me do better on a test? And then also, why do we forget things? Sort of how you can tell us a little bit more about how memory works and, how can we trick it into working a little bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. Memory is really fascinating. It's one of the things I really enjoy learning about in the brain. There's a few different things. So there are some different memory tricks you can use. A lot of you actually came up with some great ones when I was asking for folks to share their ideas of ways to make that grocery list memory task easier. So we can use things like trying to associate it with things that you're more familiar with. Like maybe if you eat bananas every day, maybe that word was really easy for you to remember, but maybe if you don't like oranges, maybe that's the word that you forgot. So kind of linking things that you're trying to remember to things that you already know or you're already familiar with is a great tactic to use. And the reason why that strategy works is actually because of something that neuroscientists call schemas. It's kind of like a bunch of related topics or concepts in your brain. And there's a bunch of specialized cells in our brain called neurons. And what they do is they form little networks where they kind of connect to each other to send signals back and forth. So the stronger your neural connections about bananas, the more that you're familiar with them or thinking about them, the stronger those connections are going to be, and the easier it's going to be for you to be able to remember those things. And then sort of on the flip side of that as to, why we forget some things. If you've heard people say use it or lose it, that is definitely true. So the more you're using something or repeating something, so maybe if you're studying for a test, if you don't just cram the night before, but you may a day for 5 days, that repetition, using it over and over, is really going to help you with things. And one more really fun thing about memory, because it's one of my favorite stories, as far as what parts of the brain help with memory. Of course, we talked about our temporal lobe that helps us form memories. And there's another part of your brain that helps as well called the hippocampus, which is a fun word. It's in your limbic system. And scientists found out that this part of your brain helped with memory because there was this fellow, Henry Molaison, and he had epileptic seizures. And the doctors wanted to help him by removing part of the brain they thought was causing those seizures. They actually took out the hippocampus from his brain. And after brain surgery, the great news is he didn't have any more seizures. But unfortunately, he was no longer able to form any new memories. And so while that's definitely not the way that we want to be learning today about what parts of our brain do, we definitely don't just want to be taking parts out. But that was how scientists first discovered the importance of the hippocampus to forming memories.
What a way to learn. That one's tricky. So glad someone else found that one out, a couple generations before it was any of our turn. Hey, speaking of the hippocampus, parietal lobe and some of those versus frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is easy to remember because it's in the front. Can you tell us a little more? How do these portions of the brain get their names, or even just a little bit about sort of the history of how did we find out all of this about our brains?
Sure. So I'm not sure the origin of all these. I wish they were all just like the frontal lobe, right? Wouldn't that be nice? The frontal lobe, the back lobe. No, that would be probably too easy. So I'm not sure where all the lobes got their names, but there are some different areas of the brain that are named after specific people who first learned things about that part. So for example, there's a part of our brain, it's actually in the frontal lobe on the left-hand side, and it's responsible for helping us be able to form language. So if you're thinking of some words in your head and then you say those words out loud, it's this area of your brain that helps you to do that. And it's called Broca's area, which is named for the last name Broca of the scientist who first kind of discovered what that part of the brain was responsible for. And then as far as how we learn things about the brain, that is a tricky one, and we're still finding out new ways. So just like we heard about with our Henry Molaison story, sometimes we found out sort of through accident, of certain parts of people's brains. Sometimes people are just born without certain areas of the brain, and then we can kind of learn what maybe that person's brain is doing differently. And then we also have some different specialized tools that we use now. So there's some different brain imaging software, such as EEGs. Maybe folks have heard of those. So what that does is you attach little electrodes onto your scalp, and then it helps to measure those electrical signals. When I was talking about the neurons, those special cells, they're sending electric signals back and forth. And now we have tools to help us measure that electricity.
Well, thank you. And that actually gets to another question a lot of people had, those electric signals. If you can tell us maybe how similar is our brain to a computer? It seems like they work in somewhat similar ways. Did we design computers knowing how our brain works, or have we, figured out how compatible they are with each other? Are they similar or different? I think we tend to think of our brains as supercomputers, but, what can you tell us about the relationship between brain and computer?
Yeah, that is a great question, and one I think a lot of people are thinking about nowadays. So I've definitely heard it described that people's brains are a lot more powerful than our basic computers. And I've even heard it said that, you know, how computers, some people might know, they use like ones and zeros of kind of like it's the signals are kind of on or off, on or off. But for humans, think of it as instead of just on or off, there's not just two options, there's actually dozens of different options. And so people compare human brains to what we would call quantum computing, which is kind of like this futuristic, really advanced computing system that we have not actually created yet. But that being said, computers are still a lot better at us at certain things. So, for example, just doing things really, really quick, computers are great at that. So, a lot of things that are very straightforward, like math equations. But something that I always remember is that computers can only do the things that we program them to do or the things that we tell them to do, whereas our brains are constantly responding to tons of different stimuli, new information coming in all the time. And you know, processing that information with everything that we already know, which is pretty amazing. I've also heard that the human brain can hold up to like 4 billion books worth of information, which I definitely don't have that much memorized off the top of my head. But, you know, if you just think about all the things that your brain can just do automatically, it's pretty amazing, the amount of power that we have. And we do it very efficiently. So human brains are much more energy efficient than computers are.
All right, I'm feeling better about my brain now. Thank you. Every once in a while, I see what a computer's doing, and feel like, oh, geez, I'm becoming obsolete. But that's a really good feeling. Hey, one of the most common questions we got was, can we do more optical illusions? So I wanted to ask a little bit about that. Sort of, who discovers optical illusions or creates them? Where do you find the ones that you put in your program? Can you just tell us a little bit more about optical illusions?
Oh man, they are so fun, aren't they? So you can find them all over the place. I'm not sure who all discovers them. I mean, thinking about that ballerina image, you know, that's just thinking about, hey, you know, one day someone looked at something and they're like, oh, actually, have you all probably remember this from social media with the blue dress, gold dress phenomenon that was going around a while ago? And you're like in an argument with your friend, like, no, it's blue, no, it's gold. So that's kind of the same thing, is that there are certain, you know, shapes or patterns or colors that are, again, they're ambiguous. You can kind of see it two different ways, which, you know, can lead to some arguments amongst friends, but also is really interesting. But we actually here at Pacific Science Center, I got some of the ideas for these. We do something called Science in the City, and we had actually a neuroscientist who studies these things. She studies how visual information gets processed in our brain, including optical illusions. She did a really great talk with us. It's actually on our YouTube channel if you all want to go check it out, where she really dives into the science behind optical illusion. So I definitely would recommend finding that video if you want to learn a little more about it.
Thank you. I definitely want to learn more about it. It is pretty fascinating. And like you said, a lot of it is just our brains fill in incomplete information.
Right.
The ballerina one, you mentioned that, right? Sort of like we need to create a better explanation. So it's just more evidence that our brains are always working to try to get the best explanation possible. Last one is you probably have seen before. A lot of people just wanted to know about the real brain and just sort of from your perspective holding it. So most of us have never held a brain before. What was surprising to you maybe the first time that you held it? I think people had a feel that maybe it might have been more fragile, but it seemed like it was pretty durable. What can you tell us just from the perspective of someone who's held the brain?
Yeah.
What surprises you, and what other things do you just think would be interesting from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's amazing. I'm so thankful that we have this opportunity, for all of us to learn more about the human brain by having this. Yeah, I think, it did surprise me how pretty solid it is here. It does actually feel like modeling clay. So it is actually more strong and tough than I originally thought that it would be, for sure. And I don't know. Another one of the things that people bring up a lot too is the color. So even though now it's actually more of kind of a tannish brown color, when your brain is living tissue in your head, it's actually more of a pinkish red color. So that is one difference between kind of a living tissue brain and then this brain that we have here. But yeah, it is really, really special to have it. It's pretty amazing. It is a pretty cool feeling to be able to hold it in your hand and just make observations. And it really helps to just bring the science to life, And even though we all have brains in our heads, we don't really get to see them up close. And so it's really exciting. Yeah, it just sparks curiosity and makes me always wonder more things and want to keep learning more about this amazing body part that we have. So thanks all for joining me in that adventure today.
Well, and thank you for taking us on that tour. Huge thanks to the donor who gave us that opportunity as well. That's something we should all be pretty grateful for. It's such a rare opportunity, and thanks to you for taking us through it. So to everyone out there, hopefully your brain got a good workout today. The brain is a muscle, so the more you use it, the stronger and more powerful it becomes. Hopefully, this was helpful in that pursuit for you. Thanks to everyone at Pacific Science Center. I know you guys are going to be back next month for we got a couple more classes coming up. So if you enjoyed this, there's plenty more to come. And as we promised, let me get the instructions up here on the screen because we learned some of us will learn a lot better from seeing them by just listening. So let's get occipital with it. Here is that information for you on the way out to tag the right handles here for that opportunity to win a virtual field trip with Pacific Science Center and 3 free months of VT Plus. If you want to know more about VT Plus, click the link on your screen. If you're interested in more classes, we'll see you back at varsitytutors.com here really soon. So huge thanks to Holly and the team at Pacific Science Center. Thanks to all of you for all of your questions and participation. And we'll see you back here soon, everyone.